Welcome, everyone. My name is Kevin Kester. I'm a cattleman from Parkfield, California, and currently serve as president of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. I'm glad you've taken time to participate in the Cattlemen's webinar series. As a participant, your line will be muted, but feel free to type in questions in the question box on your screen, and at the end of the presentations, the team will answer as many as time will allow. If you have trouble with your technology, or if you are joining us only for the audio, the webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing in a few days at ncba.org. That's ncba.org. The webinar tonight offers a discussion covering the tools available to manage your risk associated with drought. You'll hear program background information from Michael Seelig, USDA Risk Management Specialist, and then get a deeper dive into the latest tools available to help you make wise financial decisions in the face of uncertain weather from risk management and insurance experts Derek Hobbs and Jared Clark with Sylvius Financial. We'll finish the presentation with a timely market update and outlook from Dr. Derrell Peel, Extension Livestock Marketing Specialist at the Oklahoma State University. And as always, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions of the presenters at the end of the webinar. And just a note, NCBA and our Cattlemen's webinar series do not promote any single insurance organization. Tonight's presentation is offered to give producers a deeper look into the programs offered by those who work with the programs every day, and we appreciate all our presenters helping us get that done. Now, I'll hand it over to Michael to get us started. Michael?
Thank you, Kevin. So tonight I'll be covering the Pasture rangeland forage program as a risk management tool that can be used for livestock producers and their risk management strategy. So today I'll be going over a very high-level history, summary of business, how this program's performed over time. We're going to go just a little bit of a talk about the rainfall program, just a general overview, and then I'm going to go into a little bit of the NOAA, the data set that we use on this rainfall program, and then cover some of the key points. So just a little bit about us, the USDA Risk Management Agency. So we don't actually sell any insurance programs. We actually just administer these programs. So only crop insurance agents sell these programs. We administer it from a nationwide standpoint. We have approved insurance providers that you can find on our RMA's website that you can go to and search in your local area, that you can find an authorized agent in your area to purchase this program or any other programs that the USDA Risk Management Agency offers. So just give you a little bit of a history on our program. So this actually was mandated by the 2000 Agriculture Act of 2000 to develop a program to cover pasture rangeland forage program. So it was the first time that we had any type of program to cover for this type of coverage for these type of producers. So this was actually a 522. So just to kind of give you an overview, there's only two ways to develop a program in the Risk Management Agency. And one is a 522, which is an RMA developed product, and a 508. So this came in as a 522, which is an RMA developed product. We started off as this big contract with four contracts and 3 different contractors, and we ended up with the program that we have today. So I'm gonna go over just a little bit of a history, how this evolved over time. So we started off in 2000. As you can see, these are the pilot states. I'm not gonna go in detail. And as we move through time, you can see as we started changing, we used to have a rainfall and a vegetation. And as you'll see in 2016, we removed that, the VI program, and just moved everything to a rainfall program nationwide. So you can see as the time you tell, we started piloting the VI program in different states. We used to have the VI in the eastern state, and we realized that the canopy coverage didn't really work, and the VI really worked more in the western states than it did in the eastern states. So we started moving away from that. And then we started doing some expansions throughout the years, as you can see through these different maps as we did. And we started stabilizing, 2012, you can see we had slight changes here, just a few expansion states, but nothing major. We moved in 2013, we just moved a couple states to an RI, but pretty much everything else stayed pretty much the same. The biggest change was when we moved to 16, where we just moved to a nationwide RI. And then we followed suit, and on our other rainfall, the VI moved everything, all our programs to an RI across the United States for everything that we have, besides annual forage, bush, and expanded. So just to give you kind of an idea of how this program, started off and then what it is today. As you can see, in 2007, we had about 24 million acres, and currently we have about 98 million acres. And just one thing to point out, as you can see through if you look here in the quantity of acres that we have insured, what we find that people do is they tend to chase the program around. So in bad years, they jump in the next year, and then they jump out in good years. So as you can see here, so we'll have like 49 in 2013, and then now they dropped in 2014 to 46. So you can see, so it was a bad year or a good year in 13. So then you got some people that jumped out. So we have that over time. People do it. We tend to tell people, if you find the program that works for you, just stay in it. Don't try to chase it around between the good and bad years. So now I'm going to go over just a very general overview of how this program works. It's an area-based plan. So the losses are covered in an area called a grid. It does not measure any actual individual production. It's all based on a deviation of normal historical precipitation during an interval. So, and I'll go over that here in just a little bit. So it doesn't reward any kind of poor management practices. Producers can't influence the losses. It's all based on this rainfall index that we provide. So again, like I said, it's an area-based program. The grids are about 0.25 degrees. So they're not, following any grids or counties. So that 0.25 is roughly about 17 miles by 15 or 16 miles. That's about the size of a grid, but that changes as you move away from the equator. It utilizes the NOAA Climate Prediction Center data. So it uses multiple point data system. It's not a single point. So there could be a minimum of 4 stations used in your grid, but it can be upwards of 7 to 10 stations, depending on your area and depending on what's reported. It's a deviation from normal from 1948 to present. We always tell producers we have a tool out there, and I know some companies have tools too, but review the historicals, because we always say if it hasn't worked in the past, it's probably not going to work in the future. And we have a tools site on our website. If you go to the PRF webpage, you can see the tools, and you can go back and look at history, and you can plug in some of your results and see what, if you had the program in say like 2011, how well will this work for you in 2011 if you bought it. Now everything's looking at today's rates and premium and county-based values, which is what we're giving you for if it's a grazing or haying. So this is an example of your area or grid that we refer to. So just showing you here that we're not following any state or county line. It's just an overlay over of the United States, and just kind of showing you it's not following any kind of boundaries. So we offer these what called intervals. They're 11-month intervals. It's designed for producers to choose when precipitation is important to the producer. So it gives these producers the ability to manage their risk based on their individual risk management strategy. So what it's designed to do is you pick the months that when precipitation is important for your forage growth, and then you ensure in those months that are important for you. So you pick 2-month intervals. You can't overlap those months, so they start in January. So they go January, February, March. You can't have an overlapping month. So if you have January, February, you can't have February, March. And then you allocate a percent throughout to get a total of 100% throughout the whole year of the 11-month interval. The only insurable cause of loss that we're going to pay is when there's a deviation from the final grid index, which is essentially there's a deviation from your precipitation from normal precipitation for that grid. The 2 intended uses that we cover, the main one is that most of our acreage is done is grazing. We do have a haying option. There's 2 different values, they're county-based values that we establish for both of those values. Now haying, we do have some organic practices out there for haying, but grazing is majority of our acres that we offer and probably is most applicable to you guys. So there is subsidy on this. Now, as you can see here, coverage subsidy starts based on your coverage level you select, anywhere from, 51% to 59% based on what the coverage level. Now that coverage level is going to be based on the final grid index for the program. So being like, you have to have a deviation of, 85% of your normal rainfall in order to get an indemnity payment. So you got to look at that when you're looking at your historical results to see how well is this going to work, and when you're choosing your coverage level, and don't just solely focus on the subsidy amounts. A couple of things just about the data. We're going to get a little bit into the data just to kind of give you an overview. This is gridded data. It's pre-processed by NOAA. RMA doesn't do anything further to process or change this data. There is a total of 6,000 reporting stations daily at a minimum, but there's normally about 15,000 reported daily. The only stations report by the cutoff are used, and stations reporting weekly or monthly are not used. And there's this interpolation process, which I'll show you. I'll have a little slide here later on that'll kind of explain that a little bit more. So on this slide, and we have this on our RMA's website, if you go into our main page, there's this site here, and there's a link to get to this on one of our tools website. You can actually get to this link, and this changes every day, and it tells you where the stations are at. But this kind of gives you an idea where the reporting stations are. This is all we know where they're located at, but this changes every day. Again, only the first order stations reporting to NOAA CPCU by the daily cutoff are used. NOAA does not release these stations to us. So if you called us, we wouldn't be able to tell you, hey, we got it from this and these stations. And again, when I talk about the interpolation process, you'll understand a little bit more why. So this is why it's crucial that producers use the historical tools to determine whether this product is appropriate or if it works in their area or not. So this is that interpolation that I was telling you about. And so if you can see here in this circle here, it shows you here's your grid. Now, there's not a rain gauge in every grid, so you can see if we show an example here of 4 stations. So what it does is every day it takes a minimum 4 stations, and the station that's closest to the grid has the most weight for that day, and then essentially the next day it might be a different station. So over a 60-day time period, there could be, if there's multiple stations or a station goes offline or whatever, there could be different stations reported. So we don't know that. That's why we say it's crucial to look at the historical to see how well did it track in the past, and how well it's going to track in the future. So again, we stress to producers that PRF should be used as a tool to predict against losses in key precipitation in key months for forage growth. So ensuring in months when you don't need precipitation for that forage growth, probably not going to be most beneficial for this program. You want to ensure in the months that you need the rainfall to get that forage growth for your cattle. An example here in these coverage levels is, example, if you have an average precipitation of 3 inches and you pick a 70% coverage level, you're theoretically ensuring 2.1 inches of precipitation, which is just to kind of give you an example how that coverage level correlates to precipitation. And again, just to kind of remember, PRF is not a protection against a long-term weather such as drought or flooding. Rather, it's a reduce in precipitation during the expected interval. So, and this is similar to like NAS data used in other crops. So, we don't know what the stations are reporting, just like NAS. We didn't know who was reporting to the NAS survey. So just to kind of give you an idea. And, I know this is a drought seminar. One thing that we stress on the PRF tool, and we hear about it out there in the field, that sometimes it's quoted as drought insurance, and realistically, PRF is not drought insurance because drought covers other perils besides lack of rainfall, because the drought can ensure abnormally high temperatures or windy conditions, whereas this is only going to cover the lack of precipitation. So there is times that you can be considered in a drought, but get rainfall and the program wouldn't pay. So I always like to point that out just to make sure that people are clear the difference on how this would work and where you could be in a drought, but theoretically not get an indemnity payment under this program. So just some key points and wrapping it up here. It's crucial that, producers review those historicals and decision support tools that we provide on our website. I know some AFPs or approved insurance providers or agents might have some other tools out there that you can review. As with any other area plan, it might not track 100% of the time. So I always tell producers, look at it and see how well it has tracked in the past. And think about that. It's not going to track 100% all the time, but knowing it going into it, how well did it track, and you kind of have an idea how well it tracked in the future. What we always tell producers is, look at your past records, see how much hay you had to buy, or or how much weight you gained in the past, and look at those bad years and how well did that correlate, and then see if those historicals correlated to your results. And again, I appreciate everybody's time, and I have a link to our email if you want to jot that down, and a link to our PRF tools, and I will pass it off to Derek with Sylvius to do their presentation. And thank you for your time.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thanks for tuning in, and I want to thank the NCBA for our invitation to speak this evening. And Sylvius Financial, we're a commodity brokerage and consulting firm. We're going to be demonstrating our livestock Encompass software this evening, and I'd like to go through our methodology a little bit, do a live demo with you of a backgrounding example, and then later we'll do some Q&A. But Sylvius Financial, a sister company to Sylvius Insurance Group, but our companies as a whole we are software driven, and we've come at agriculture risk management from the standpoint of how do we help you as a rancher, you as a row cropper, how do we help you guys make financial decisions less emotionally and more objectively. And so, in fact, just in putting this together, I was kind of reminded of the Major League movie where Willie Mays Hayes is sitting and standing at first base. He's got his nice clean uniform on. He puts his leather gloves on, and he looks at the first baseman and goes, "I'm headed to second base. I'll see you later." And as we have gotten into the livestock business, we realize a lot of our cattle operations kind of go into the business ready to tackle and ready to, you buy, you feed, or whatever you're doing to get to profitability. And by the time you get to the end, you're feeling maybe like something bad happened. And in the movie Major League, when Willie Mays Hayes takes off for second base and dives, he misses second base by about 2 feet. And so what we're doing with our software is we're trying to bridge the gap of those 2 feet, or what are the variables that are causing profitability to be hit or missed. And so in the design of our software, we said with the livestock world, there is a purchase price, there is a cost of gain, there is a rate of gain, there's one-time costs that are hitting you folks, there's death loss, there's basis, there's future spreads, and then the big part of the world that we're dealing in is time. Because all of these variables above time are moving and ebbing and flowing and changing as the animal is gaining weight. And what we're trying to see is that variability and fluctuation and profitability over time, and trying to identify the sweet spot for profitability based on pulling all of this data together to visualize it. And another way to look at this is, and this, even though I'm going to do a backgrounding example tonight, this applies to a cow-calf operation, it applies to a stocker, a backgrounder, feed yard, because there's a starting weight, and then the question is, what bucket of time am I working towards? How many pounds am I adding? What is the cost associated with that? What are the variables? And so ultimately, where is that sweet spot? So digging into our software, we really have 3 key tabs, and I want to introduce the concept of that, and then we'll go into the live example here. But the first tab is just a dashboard. It's like an inventory sheet. We're going to have an ID. We're going to have our purchase date. We're going to have when it was last updated, the number of head, whether it's a group of animals that are going to be sold as feeders or fats, the weight that they were brought in at, the price that they were bought in at. It's a simple dashboard. And the next tab, this is the tab in what we do where an ID, or just think of it in terms of a load. A load comes in and we're recording that load of animals. We're giving it an ID. We're assigning it to a group. And I'll talk about the group here in a minute. We're going to give it a type. Are we selling these as feeders or fats? And we're entering the number of head, the purchase price, the purchase weight, and then below, what you see in kind of the gridded numbers below are the variables. And again, this is by load. And this is where we're managing on a monthly basis with our operations, but we're assigning a simple rate of gain. We're assigning a cost of gain month to month. We're assigning, maybe there's some individual costs that we know are going to happen in month 3 or 4 or 5. We're going to assign a death loss, either at specific month intervals, and we're going to assign a basis. And that's going to walk through time. And that's a starting point as we enter those animals. Because what's going to happen, and what we realized in designing software in different levels of our companies is software from just an operation level is very difficult because you have a bunch of operations or a bunch of different software tools that you're needing to manage. So what we found is our job, we have a team that is just dedicated to keeping this data updated month to month. Because we may have said, what are your pounds gained on average? But this month, it may have been a hot month, or it may have been a very cold month. Your cost of gain, you may have had to bring feed in and the rate of gain came down. But the point is, once we hit the averages and plug it all in one time, we're coming in every month with our operations and updating the details of each ID or each load of animals. So that's the ID tab. That's our management tab. And by the way, the whole goal here is to get to what? To get to understanding profitability. So once we've got an ID established, then we can go to our risk tab where we're actually managing, once all of those variables are plugged in, we're now giving the operations a 2-dimensional view of profitability. And so like in this example, and just on this screenshot, you're seeing that kind of looking down, it says average weight of the animals, of these 418 animals. It's kind of giving an average weight in the month of October, and then we're adding that weight and going into November, and you can see that profitability building over time. And it has all of the assumptions dialed in, and we're going to, once we get into a demo of this, this is setting the stage for us to make risk management decisions. Should I contract ahead of time? Should I sell futures? Should I use options? When should I get in them? When should I get out of them? Right? Those are questions that, again, kind of the major league story, don't want to be left short at second base. So how can I visualize the idea of making these decisions and see the impact of them before I pull the trigger? And once we get that profitability set, and this is the key in the way that we're doing this, it's more than software, it's the process. Because what we're going to do is we're going to review the present situation with the operation. We're going to adjust those cattle variables on a monthly basis. We're going to review the market landscape and evaluate the gaps or the holes in profitability and where that sweet spot is. Propose some solutions to hedging and protecting, either implement or decline that, and we just stay in that loop every month until those animals are sold or gone to market. So with that, what I want to do is I want to look at an actual example here that we built for the program tonight. And in the dashboard, I'm looking at the last 4 line items here, LP318, LP419, LP520, and 621. Basically, we've just built purchases that were based on the last, I think it was last week's Oklahoma City auction. So these are very close prices to what's going on in this moment. So we built this up with 4 different loads to total. So we got 108 animals, 90 animals, 133, and 87 with slightly different weights and slightly different purchase prices based on those weights. And we're all putting them in the same group. Notice that they're all in the same group because our goal is if an animal is a similar weight, purchased at a similar point in time, it's going to experience similar weather. It's going to experience similar financial variabilities. It's going to experience the same similar financial. So overall, we want to view that group of 4 sets of animals as one to make our hedging decisions. Some operations we work with just say everything we buy in January we want to look at together. Everything we buy in February we want to look at together. So now that we've got that, we can flip through and look at any of those IDs independently. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump to the risk tab. And in this risk tab, what I'd like to highlight here, see if I can highlight this. I'm looking at, first of all, the average weight of the animals over time. Again, I'm walking through time with you guys. So with the average of 418 animals, my average weight of those 4 purchases is 476 pounds at an average price of 172. And so as I go through August from today, I'm going to add, based on about a 2.8 pound rate of gain, I'm going to be 32 pounds added to my animals. Then the next month, I'm going to be 75, and I'm going to roll through time, slowly building my average animal weight. My cost of gain on average through my different loads is right here at 80 cents. You can see it varies through the different time buckets, and you can adjust that for each time bucket. You know, some folks say, you know, as they get heavier, I gotta crank that cost up. So we're able to make that independent one-time adjustment inside of a month at any time. And so given that, I can take my cursor and I can get rid of any column that I want, because what am I looking for in a backgrounding situation? I'm going to be looking somewhere between the 700, to 900 pound range. So I'm going to get rid of everything other than what looks like our time frame from November through January, 700 to 900 pounds. And we can see, and what do we do in setting this up? We are putting the current futures prices in the middle for each month. So and if a month doesn't have a futures price, it takes on the next front month. So, we'll pull in January for the December, and we're using January. So what you're seeing running through the middle of our grid is the current prices. And we do that for 2 reasons. We want to stress test the portfolio. We want to know profitability, and this is profitability per head. After expenses in each monthly bucket, this is my profit per head based on, if I look at this 716 pounds right here in the month of November at 151 on the board, assuming about a 5 under basis, I'm, after all of my expenses, I'm at a $34 profit, okay? And if I move into December and take that animal to 798 pounds at the end of December at $1.49 based on the January and at an increased negative basis of -5, my profitability goes from 34 to 69. So now we're starting to see how to identify based on time the sweet spot in profitability. So let's go ahead and just lop off the November. So we're left with 2 months, December and January. And looking at the top, I can, just to kind of show you some of the bells and whistles of the software and what we do, I can click down through here and I can look at basically my values mark to market of my portfolio or my profitability, or I can look at the number of deltas that I have exposure on. Contracts, right? How many contracts of exposure do I have to the market? So it's telling me in December I've got 5, in January I've got 6 contracts as I gain pounds on those animals. And then I can change to a total value of profit and loss. So I can go to, the total value of profit and loss on my animals, or I can be at a per head profit and loss. A lot of the folks we work with are on a per head basis. And then I can click on all these different links of looking at different angles of my overall portfolio. And down below, what we see down here on the bottom left-hand corner, and I'll scroll down, these are either closed out hedge positions or contracts that we've set on some of our animals. In fact, on one contract, we've assumed that we just did a straight contract into the future. We just closed down and collapsed the profit. And then we've got a few profit. We got a loss of $3,500 on some puts, $1,200 of profit on a call, $5,900 on futures. And it looks like we've got just a little spread down here that on one contract of feeders, and it's based on the fact that we sold the cash. And the main reason, just as an example, showing you what we do, if we actually contracted animals, maybe we're looking at a spread in the market like this, where we say January feeders versus March feeders right now is around, typically around January is usually 2 over March. And by the time we get to December, usually March is 1 over January. So there can be a full $3 move in that spread between now and December after we've already collapsed into a contract. So we can actually input that spread and we'll be able to, see the impact of spreads moving. One of the main things that we're doing here is hedging, right? And what we want to do is demonstrate what different hedging decisions do. This is the whole reason we designed the software. We designed it to get to the point of saying, should I sell should I do a contract? Should I do futures? So here we go. We can choose any contract. So we'll go to January and we'll say, well, what happens if, based on 5 or 6 contracts of animals, what if I sell 3 contracts of futures? How did it change my profitability? And you can see right here how it changed profitability. In fact, you can look at, well, here's my portfolio before I added the trade. I could go at a 149 price, I can make $134 in January, but if we fall to 119, I can lose 86. Or if we jump up here to 179, I can make 355 bucks. But if I add those short 3 futures, I can eliminate that risk all the way down to 120. Because, some folks will say, well, I just want to, I just sell futures, right? So I'm just going to sell 6 or 7 contracts and totally flatline my risk. Well, that's great. And what we can do is we can take that and we can just say, let's save that as an idea. And we'll just say, let's just say futures sale and hit save as a test. And then we can go in and say, well, but let's look at a different example. Maybe we don't want to just flatline our profitability. In fact, being a financial advisor, I would sit down with folks who are managing their retirement money, and we would ask what their risk profile is. Well, I have a long time to retirement. I'm aggressive growth. Well, they take different risk than someone that's income preservation living off of their money. So rather than us trying to call market direction, what we're trying to do is to help the operations identify the risk that they're willing to take or not willing to take, and what the best solution is for hedging based on the variables that are out there today, and help you kick the tires on that decision before you pull the trigger. So here we go. Let's say, what if we come in here and we buy, instead of doing futures, what if we just do 6 contracts of slightly out of the money puts? And by the way, it pulls in the premium, and so we're going to buy, contracts, a 148 strike, and we're going to buy 6 contracts of those, okay? And I want to do that on the January board. So here we go. It calculates the premium, and then all I'm looking for is upside, let's say to 158. I want 10 bucks higher. So I'm willing to give away my upside, because what that'll do is reduce the cost of my overall hedge from 13,000. It'll reduce it to a total of 7,000. And you can see the impact in the profitability to do that. So I haven't locked in all my profitability, and I'm allowing myself a little more upside. And I can even click on this drop down and say, let's look at the test only idea. What is this option strategy really doing on a per head basis against my operation if I pull the trigger? And by the way, one of the beautiful things that we have in here is because we have time, we can see the value of that option position in December, the value of that option position in November, and the value of that thing in January. So we're seeing how, if I held on to this position from December to January and we didn't move in price, I would go from a $6 loss to a $16 loss in January. I'd lose 10 bucks just holding that position. But you're able to just kick the tires again and run the different ideas. So test, I can look at just the animals by themselves to understand how those animals are running and the profitability on those. I can look at my cash trades or the contracts and what they're doing against me or for me. I can look at my futures and options positions. So everything that we've done in the futures and options world against these animals have closed out about a $9 per head profit. And so going back to the portfolio, again, the idea here that we want to just do in kind of bringing this into a close is we want to be able to circle back, move the variables of the animals month to month. We want to demonstrate different hedging strategies, save them, view that profitability, challenge the operation to say, guys, what's your goal? Are you looking for upside here? Are you wanting to collapse profitability? Here are the different ways to do it, and then allow that cycle to continue to happen in executing that. So that's the software. That is Sylvius Financial and the livestock Encompass. And back out here, and I want to just pop up one more screen. If you have any questions, obviously, for how we did that, this is my email address and numbers and our website. But any questions, obviously, at the end, we can take those too. So thank you very much for your time. And now I want to turn it over to Dr. Peel.
All righty. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening as we wrap up this hour. We're going to, we've got a lot of folks around the country dealing with a lot of different situations as far as their drought or forage conditions and those sorts of things. But, we're going to take a quick look at the cattle market environment that we're all working in right now. And what we see ahead here as we go through the last part of 2018 and on into 2019. So, the general market setting that we're in now, I think we've evolved to this point over the last few months. I think it's probably going to persist for some time to come. If you start at a very global perspective, obviously we're in a very turbulent situation right now. There's a lot of uncertainty out there. There's a lot of trade issues, tariff issues, a lot of policy issues yet to be determined in some of that in various settings. And so that part is a fairly murky environment, a fairly volatile environment at this point in time. If we look at the U.S. economy, up to this point in time, we've had a very strong macro economy. Unemployment's very low, consumer spending has been very strong, but some of these things that are evolving, particularly out of the global environment, do present some threats ahead, and not a certainty in any sense of the word, but certainly the potential for some bumps in the road as we go down ahead, and that will play into our view of the cattle market. Agriculture broadly, if we think about crop production, we're trying to figure out what we've got here for crops, for feed grains, things that will affect the cattle industry. Looks like we're kind of, not sure whether we've got a record corn crop out there, but it's going to be a pretty big crop in any event. We don't see a lot of issues from the feed grain side, probably, that will affect the cattle industry. Again, forage conditions are another matter, quite a bit of variability in the situation, and very difficult to read this year from my standpoint. It's been an unusual year. You can't just look at the drought monitor on the one hand, or current rainfall, or a soil moisture map. It's a little more complex than that to try to sort it all out. But so we're keeping an eye on that. And then as we get into the cattle industry, it's a little different environment. With all of this sort of murkiness that's out there in the external markets, that will have some impacts, and we don't know exactly how many impacts or how long those impacts will be there, or even for sure when they're going to kick in. The cattle industry, at this point in time, I would describe it as kind of so far so good. For the last 18 months, we've been in an expansionary phase. We've had increased production. We knew there were going to be supply pressures. Up to this point, demand has kept up with that and has kept us in pretty good shape. And that means that, and we've said this for many months now, that demand is the key. Demand will continue to be the key, and that makes us vulnerable to anything that would impact that demand as we go forward. So we look at the year to date, right at this moment, most cattle and beef prices right now are pretty close to year-ago levels. Again, that's fairly impressive when you think about the fact that we've continued to increase production, as we'll see here momentarily. I guess I would point out that at the current time, the one exception to that in terms of cattle prices by different classes is really the cull cow market is kind of on its heels right now. We've had some real weakness there that's really coming out of that trimmings market, that hamburger market, and that's probably a testament to some of the demand-related impacts of other meats and so on. We'll talk a bit more about that here in just a minute. But we're in a situation where we still have more cattle. We have more cattle coming. The cow herd is still growing, I believe, based on all the information we have at this point in time. I think it's growing much more slowly, but it is still growing, and we're probably heading towards something like a peak as we go into 2019. But through that time period, we see larger cattle numbers. We've got larger feedlot inventories. We'll have a cattle on feed report this Friday. We're anticipating it'll show a 4 to 4.5% year-over-year larger feedlot inventory, and that's pretty much where we've been the last 3 or 4 months. We've got a bigger calf crop on the ground here in 2018, so we've got larger feeder supplies in the pipeline. That's going to carry us not only through 2019, but really, or through 2018, but clearly through 2019 as well. So we're still in this bigger supply scenario, even though it's winding down a little bit. For the year to date, beef production's up around 3.2%. That's based on about that same level of increase in cattle slaughter. It varies by class. Heifers are up significantly. Steer slaughter is actually slightly smaller than this time a year ago on the year-to-date basis. Cow slaughter is very strong. Carcasses are a little bit bigger this year after dropping last year. That's one of the things we're watching that'll kind of put the final determinant on beef production for the year. So far, carcasses are actually not up as much as I had feared they might be. So it's kind of holding that level, that rate of increase year over year in check a little bit, but it's something we'll watch as we go through the seasonally bigger carcass weights we expect to see here at the end of the year. And again, we've had strong beef demand. That's been the key. We've had a strong domestic market, and we've had a particularly strong international trade situation that has helped the beef markets in the U.S., cattle markets in the U.S. For the year to date, through the first 6 months of the year, beef exports are up nearly 15%. All 5 of our major markets are up on a year-to-date basis: Japan, South Korea, Mexico, Hong Kong, Canada. At the same time, we're seeing some fairly tempered beef imports. We're up just fractionally, about 1% on the year-to-date, with a mixed bag of impacts. We're getting a little bit more beef from Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, and a little bit less beef from Mexico and Brazil among our major sources of beef imports into the U.S. Cattle imports from Canada and Mexico are running just about the same as last year. We're up less than 1% on those numbers, very close to last year. As we look ahead to 2019, I think there's lots of question marks on this part of the market. Again, we've got so much uncertainty out there. NAFTA is still up in the air. We don't know what the conclusion is going to be to the NAFTA discussions. We don't know where we're going to end up. We've got some tariffs in place that we've done, some tariffs that other people have done. We're not through with that process. In fact, we're at the point right now, it appears, on adding some additional tariffs on China, and that will lead to some further consequences and so on. So a lot of uncertainty on this trade part going forward. It's been very strong up until now, but at some point in time, we're probably going to see some impacts from all of this turbulence that's out there in those global markets. To summarize 2018, in terms of beef and the other meats, the yellow highlighted boxes here, we're expecting to end the year with about a 3.6% year-over-year increase in beef production. That will be a record level of beef production. I'll show you a chart to put that in perspective in just a second. Pork is up about 4%, or we project it will be in 2018. That's also a record level of pork. Broiler production is up 2.1% or thereabouts, and that will be a record level of broiler production. So obviously that means we've got record total meat production in the U.S. up nearly 2.8%. And again, when you look at the beef market in isolation, from retail back through wholesale and all the way down to cattle markets, the performance of these markets has been pretty good in the face of that kind of supply environment. Now, if you look over here, towards the right, total U.S. or total consumption of beef, pork, and poultry, and then you add them together, that's not at a record level. It's the highest level since, I believe, 2008. And the reason it's not at a record level, even though production is at a record level, is because, because of the trade moderation that we're seeing, the impacts of that trade and how trade has evolved over the last decade or so to really play a much more fundamental role. So it's large and it's growing, but it's not at a record level when we look at domestic consumption. Obviously, if anything disrupts those international flows of any of the meats, that has implications then back in the domestic market. For beef, this kind of sums up the supply side. The blue line here is the beef cow herd, which has been expanding from the low in 2014. It grew very rapidly in 2015, 2016, slowed down some in 2017, and we believe it's slowing down even more here in 2018. Again, at this point, it appears it's heading towards perhaps a peak in 2019, could push off into 2020. Beef production, which dropped to a recent low in 2015, has expanded sharply in 2016, 2017, and again, here projections for 2018 would put us at an all-time record level of beef production. If we look ahead to next year, we're gonna take this even farther. The situation continues not only for beef, but really for the other meats as well. Again, the yellow highlighted boxes show current projections for what we think it looks like for 2019 for beef, pork, and poultry and total meat production. Obviously, these will change over time as we move forward and get some additional information, but it looks like we see increases in all of those. So that suggests yet another record level of meat production in 2019. But you'll notice the year-over-year increases here for beef, pork, and poultry are all less than this year. We're sort of moderating those supply increases. We begin to relieve some of that supply pressure, at least in a relative sense, going forward. Again, per capita consumption next year for all the meats would push up just a tick over 220 pounds. That's not a record level again, but it is a record, or it's a highest level in quite a number of years, and shows that continued increase. In that environment, beef markets, we kind of know what's happened, what's going to happen from a supply standpoint. If we continue the path we've been on for quite a few months now in terms of demand, keeping up with that supply, then we move forward with no major problems internally in the beef industry. But there are clearly some threats out there, and they relate to this external environment, what kinds of impacts we might see begin to weigh on this market as we go forward. And there's a number of things could happen. We've got tariffs in place, metal prices, steel and aluminum prices are higher. That eventually is going to show up in some higher input costs that will affect agriculture as well as many other industries. Exports for beef at this point have not been directly affected very much by the tariffs. The Chinese have tariffs on us, but that's a tiny little market. It's probably postponing the ability for us to grow that market at this point in time, but not having a major impact in terms of the current flow of beef. But as we go forward, that can change. Again, we don't really know what's going to happen with NAFTA, and that affects two of our major markets. More broadly, what happens to exchange rates may have an impact. And so we watch these impacts. We're generally seeing the dollar a little bit stronger relative to other currencies in this environment. If that pushes more, then that creates an additional headwind for beef exports as we go forward. So again, it's more a question, I think, of the uncertainty than any certainty about what's going to happen, but certainly the potential is there for some impacts. Probably the biggest threat out there is things that could impact beef demand, should it happen. Competing meats, we kind of know what's going to happen there. We've got lots of pork and poultry out in the market. We're going to have even more as we move forward. But it really then is a question of those trade impacts. If we continue to export at a fairly robust level, not only beef, but the other meats as well, then we probably mitigate that impact. If on the other hand, anything sort of interrupts that, then we could really see some additional pressure come to bear in the domestic market. Macroeconomic conditions in the U.S., again, are vulnerable, I think is the right word to use here. Consumer spending, as I said, has been a major driver of robust demand in the U.S. We're going to start to see in the coming months, we really haven't seen it yet, but we're going to start to see some impacts of these tariffs. It's going to start raising prices on goods, and we'll have some generalized impacts on consumer spending, which will then translate into some indirect effects, very likely on meat demand and beef demand specifically. There's a potential for inflation, and obviously the Fed's watching that. That's one of the reasons they've started raising interest rates. There's a number of things out here that could create some headwinds in the macroeconomic or the macroeconomy that ultimately then translate into some potential problems for beef demand going forward. It's not a certainty. It's not a question of it necessarily even being immediate, but over the coming months, unless this thing, some of these trade things start to get resolved here in the fairly near future, we're going to see some of these impacts begin to take place as we go forward. So with all of that said, what are we looking at in a very broad annual average perspective? If you go to the right-hand side of this chart and kind of look at calf prices, feeder cattle, fed cattle prices, in a general sense, you can call them kind of sideways. In fact, we've got calf prices at this point in time actually showing a little bit of strength, slight on feeder cattle, and fed cattle maybe taking a little bit of a lag to get there as we work through these pipeline supplies that we know are out there over the next year to 15 or 18 months. But in general, we're talking about relatively stable prices. Obviously, both supply and demand at some point will matter on that. We know the supply side is going to continue to grow again through 2019, really on into 2020. If in fact this cow herd does peak out as we go into 2019, and we just have to wait and see how that happens. The demand side, I've said it several times, but I'll emphasize again, is really the key. This chart assumes that we don't have any major changes in the demand picture, either domestically or internationally, relative to what we've been seeing for the last year to year and a half, that has allowed demand to absorb this additional production in the market and mitigate that supply pressure that's out there. So, and that's kind of the expectation at this point. We don't really see any reason to expect it any different, but we're well aware that as we go forward, there are some threats out there and some potential for some changes. So if you like numbers, here's some specific price forecasts at this moment in time. Obviously, these do get changed, they get updated, but if you look here at the fourth quarter of 2018, on a year-over-year basis, we've got calf prices, feeder cattle, fed cattle, all slightly down from a year ago. That's mostly because fourth quarter last year, if you remember, was significantly stronger than we really anticipated it would be. So it's not really a big negative, and it's not a major drop in any event. We're talking about 3 to 5% probably in most cases. On an annual average basis for 2018, we've got calf prices again slightly stronger, feeder cattle prices about even with a year ago, and a slight year-over-year annual average decrease in fed cattle prices. For 2019, again, kind of across the board, we're holding pretty steady with these calf prices, feeder cattle prices, perhaps just a little bit more weakness, but these are very modest numbers. again, they will get updated. As new information becomes available, these will change, but this is kind of the way it looks at this point in time. With that, I promise to be done by 8 o'clock. We're actually a minute or two ahead of that at this point. My contact information is at the bottom of this screen. If you're interested beyond this broadcast in contacting me, feel free to do that. You're welcome to, and I'll try to respond to you. We're going to have a little time for some questions here, and with that, I'm going to kick it back over to Kevin.
Well, thank you, Dr. Peel, and thank you to all our presenters for that informative overview. Risk management is a very important issue that cattlemen must always consider, especially in regions where weather and markets are unpredictable. As we move into our question and answer session, I want to remind everyone that this webinar is provided for free by NCBA as a service to the industry. If you are an NCBA member, I want to thank you for your investment in the future. And if you are not, we'd love to have you join us in advocating for a profitable future for cattlemen. You can find more information on joining NCBA by visiting www.ncba.org. Or I'd be more than happy if somebody wanted to reach out to me directly on my email at kkester@beef.org. So now let's get to your questions, and thank you again for participating in the webinar tonight. Jesse, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jesse Fulton, here with National Cattlemen's Beef Association in the Denver office. I am the Associate Director of Producer Education. I'd like to thank everyone for jumping on tonight for our webinar. If you can see on your screen, there is a chat box. Feel free to chat in questions, and we will get those to our speakers. If we run out of time to answer the questions, or you have questions that pop up later on, feel free to email those at producered@beef.org, and we'll get those questions forwarded on to our speakers to get them answered for you. With that, I'm going to jump right into it. Michael, this question's for you. For PRF, how would I ensure land that is both grazed and hayed? I graze my cattle on them at the beginning, and then towards the end, I might cut hay at the beginning, and then I'll go through and graze instead of making a third cutting, if you would.
So they would have to tell us what their intended use is, unless they can split out their field. We don't require all insurable acres. We don't require them to insure all acres. So they could theoretically, if they had 1,000 acres, they could break out, say 200 acres and say this is for haying, and then do the other, say another 500 acres for grazing. So you would have to separate it that way. You would just designate the number of acres for each intended use.
Perfect, thank you. For Derek, if I'm running stockers, can you advise me a little on buying cattle?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from a software standpoint, the same general procedures are going to apply, whether we're doing it, from a feedlot standpoint, the stocker, cow-calf. We're going to be looking at that purchase price. We're going to be plugging in and looking at those recent auctions, and it's going to project out with some assumed variables like what we talked about. We're going to ask the same questions. What are our cost of gains? What are our rate of gains? What kind of death losses are we wanting to assume? And the bigger variable, what kind of basis assumptions do we want to make? But yeah, in the minute that we get those general variables in place, you're using that software in many ways to pull the trigger on a purchase, because you're seeing the end goal, which is, are these animals ultimately leading to profitability, break even, or close to it? Or not, and let's stay away, right? So hopefully that answers it.
Perfect, thank you. And Dr. Peel, with the growing herd, is that going to lean to a bearish market for us?
Very good question at this point. The cattle industry has, if you look at a long history, the last 100+ years, it's been very cyclical in nature. And I think it's fair to say in many cases, we've kind of tended to exaggerate that signal. We've overshot the mark a little bit and then go the other way. and seen some fairly exaggerated price signals, price cycles that went along with that to try to get us to respond to that. That said, and I hate to bet against history, but I'm encouraged by the fact that what I see with the slowdown in expansion we're seeing here in 2018, or at least as it appears to me, I see the potential here for this industry to actually come into what I'm going to call a soft landing. I don't think we've overshot the mark. It doesn't look to me like we're in the process or really tempted to do that. It's possible that drought conditions this year have actually played into that a little bit by tempering some people's plans a little bit. I don't think that's a major part of it, but it might have at the margin played a role in that. So I'm encouraged at this point that, again, that we don't necessarily have to overshoot the mark and go into a strongly bearish market. Our price projections, as you saw, are for kind of constant type prices as going forward. So we're going to be watching both the supply side. What do we do as we finish out this cattle cycle, but also very, very keenly then watching that demand side. If demand is strong and grows very strongly in the next 2 or 3 years, we probably need some additional expansion, and we may sort of reactivate a little bit of expansion if that were to happen. On the other hand, we may have about enough in place at this point.
Great. For Derek, again, can you advise us on all the tools available for management risk?
Okay. There's a lot of tools out there. Let's just talk about some of the price ones that are out there. In fact, some of the beauty of the volatility in these markets is new products get created. The first thing I'll say is that the standard, just contract, a forward contract that you can close down and not have to worry about the price. Obviously, the future side, plain vanilla options, and as you get connected to, either the buyer or different levels, a lot of times the world of OTCs, over-the-counter hedges, which is in many ways an averaging product that will average into a certain price over time based on a set of rules. Those can be very handy items. It's almost like a privately managed rules set in place and managed price risks throughout the season for you. And then there's products that are getting designed by RMA. And like I know there is, there's new cattle programs coming out. I think on the dairy side, there's a new dairy insurance program that is a margin-oriented product that's coming out. So definitely, whether it's government subsidized or it's price risk management individually. And what we're finding is those that aren't interested in carrying their own margin anymore, we're finding that either a middleman in the equation or someone up the food chain is willing to manage that risk and basically take on the hedge risk for you if you're working with a specific individual. So be open to the people around you to ask the questions. Hey, if I sell to you, if we're working together, do you have the capability of taking on our hedges? So.
Thank you very much. Since we're running short on time, Dr. Peel, one question for you. With a lot of drought going on more in the West and a lot of producers starting to cut loose of some of their herd, and then some of the dairies starting to fall on tough times and cut loose some of their herd. If I'm a producer that is about to call off many cows or maybe just completely sell out, would you advise on holding on to those cattle until the fall, or should I just go ahead and market those cattle now?
Well, sure. Obviously, your forage situation is going to determine how much flexibility you've got there, whether you're really at the end of your rope or maybe not quite at the end of your rope in terms of that. So that's one side of it. From a market standpoint, second half of the year is generally, weaker prices. I mentioned in my presentation that the cull cow market has been remarkably weak this summer. It's really struggling under some meat market things. So, straight up cull cows I think are very weak. Now, will they go on to an even weaker fall low? I'm not sure of that. You know, we may just see more of a sideways kind of a market. It's weak already. Maybe the November seasonal low that we normally see for cull cows isn't necessarily a lot lower, but I don't see much potential for it to go up at that point in time. You know, older cows, maybe bred cows or cows that have breeding potential. Again, this is not the best time of the year to be thinking about those cattle. Young cows are going to have their strongest market in the, you know, bred cows are going to have their strongest market in the spring. And it may be worth thinking about, you know, is it worth trying to do something with a small, you know, percentage of the best cows that have the best potential to see some recovery? You know, again, I don't think there's a strong expansionary herd market as we go into 2019, but there will be a market. There's always a market for good young breeding cows. So I think you have to figure out what level you have to cut. You know, maybe you think about this cow herd, if it's kind of a typical cow herd, in sort of thirds of your cull end or your really older end, your middle end. Yeah, again, there's not a lot of good options that I see at this point in time with the cull cows. But you know, if it was a question of getting rid of them now, even though it is a weak market, and preserving what forage you've got left to maybe give you a little more flexibility with that top third of the herd, or top 25% or top 20%, whatever that number is, then that might be a way to think about it.
Derek, would you like to elaborate on that a little bit from a financial point of view?
And I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
So the question was, if a producer has a set of cows, and with the cull cow market pretty weak right now, like Derrell just explained, when would the ideal opportunity for this person to market those cull animals? Should he go ahead and cut them loose now, or in the fall, or should he try to consider on trying to winter them out and then sell them in the spring?
Yeah, and I'm going to be a lot more theoretical than specific, you know, because obviously there's a lot of variables to that, but it's going to be based really on those, when you put those hard variables together on those specific animals, to just see what, you know, how much am I at risk of losing, you know, into that, versus cutting bait right now. It's literally a risk reward question that'll be answered, you know, from operation to operation.
All right. Well, it looks like we've run out of time. I'd like to thank our speakers for joining us tonight. As always, like Kevin had mentioned, this webinar was recorded, so if you'd like to go back and rewatch or tell your friends about this webinar, you can catch it within the next 48 hours. It'll be posted at ncba.org. Just click on the producer tab at the very top of the page, and then click on the webinar option. We have several webinars listed up there that we have presented recently. Definitely check out our 4-part genetic series as well. Speakers, thank you for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.